Hello, it is 1:30. It is the 27th day of February 2021. I am Kid Migraine, the OGGM, and it's time to get all his mystic oracle. So the topic du jour, the other topic du jour, besides Ravenloft, in response to the conversation I had last week with the people from Legion of Myth. Thank you, Legion of Myth, for making me a part of your thingy last week. And we talked about this earlier today. Is my D&D different than their D&D? And is the D&D now different than D&D then? And, Gygax D&D, 4th edition, 5th edition D&D. Except there are so many versions of D&D, it gets kind of confusing which one we're talking about. Now, I know it says there's 5 editions, 5th edition D&D, says so right on the cover. But if we go to the Wikipedia and look at the timeline of all the editions, there are way more than 5. So, let's do this again. We've done it before. 1974, we have the original 3. Man and Magic, Monsters and Treasure, Underworld and Wilderness Adventure. Those are the original Gary Gygax, Dave Arneson. That is where it starts. So that's 1. We're going to mark this off. 1. In 1977, we have Advanced Dungeons & Dragons with the Monster Manual. 1978, we have a Player's Handbook. And 1979, we have the Dungeon Master's Guide. In 1977, we also have Basic Set. Blue Book. So there's 2 and 3. In 1981, we have Dungeons & Dragons, the BX version, which is the basic set, and the expert set. So there we go, another 2 more. Well, we'll call that one. BX version is counted as 1. In 1983, we have the BECMI version, basic set, expert set, and companion set, the famous red box, the blue box, and the teal box. In 1984, we have the master set, the black box. And in 1985, we have the immortal set, the gold box. We'll call that another version. So, in 1989, we have Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition with the Player's Handbook in 1989, Dungeon Master's Guide in 1991, and the Monster Book in 1991. We also have the RC version of Dungeons & Dragons, which is the basic set, the black box, and the Rules Cyclopedia. Many people consider the Rules Cyclopedia one of the best versions of Dungeons & Dragons. So there's 1, 2, 3 more. In 1993, we have a Monster Manual that replaces the 1991 Monster Manual. In 1994, we have Classic Dungeons & Dragons, tan box, levels 1 to 5. So there we go. There's another one. In 1995, we have the revised 2nd edition Player's Handbook, the revised 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons, and the revised Player's Options Dungeon Master's Options series. So there's another one. In the year 2000, we have Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition with a Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and a Monster Manual. In the year 2000, so there's another one. In the year 2003, we have Dungeons & Dragons 3.5. Now, why 3.5 is a big sore point, because basically we were forced to rebuy everything like 2 years later, and really just because there were some editing mistakes. But that's another version. So in 2003, we had Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and Monster Manual. In 2008, we have the 4th edition. In 2010, we have Dungeons & Dragons Essentials, Rules Companion, Heroes of the Fallen Lands, Heroes of the Forgotten Kingdoms, Dungeon Master's Kit, and Monsters Vault. So that counts as another one. And then 2014, we have Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition with the basic rules, which was also known as the D&D Now. And then we had the Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and Monster Manual for 5th edition. Then, of course, we had the Beginner's Box Set for 5th edition, which is slightly different than regular box edition. And then we have the Expert box set for 5th edition, which is a slightly different version. Then, of course, we have the Rick and Morty Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and the Stranger Things 5th edition, and then, of course, the Explorer's Guide to Wildemount 5th edition. And that brings us to today. So, in the question of which version of Dungeons & Dragons is the version, and is that version better than this version, and my version, and their version, currently we are looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 variations on Dungeons & Dragons. And 4th edition is just sort of this weird abnormality because it's so different. And if you look at all the other versions, they're all kind of the same. I mean, the math changed at 3rd because, well, did it change to 2nd or 3rd? I can't remember. I think 2nd? Because originally it was lower the better, and there was THACO and all this other stuff. And then they switched it to a more linear system, but I can't remember if the switch was 2nd or 3rd. But there was a switch. And then we have 5th edition. And let's face it, 5th edition is actually going backwards because it's a lot similar to the previous editions. And that it's closer to the way 3.5 and 2nd and 1st were written. 4th edition is this weird abnormality, which means, basically 4th edition was a completely separate game. It wasn't Dungeons & Dragons. If there's any edition that wasn't D&D, it's 4th. It's other than a name and the fact that it used the same dice, it was just so different than everything else. And 5th edition is so closer to what we are used to that really, we could almost say 4th edition was the Eberron role-playing game and not D&D. So maybe it doesn't count, but it still counts because it uses the name, and it still counts for in the consideration of OGL, OSR versus New Thought, 5th edition, 4th edition, all these other versions. But as you can see, we have 21 versions of D&D, each one slightly different, each one either having a different writer or a different editor or different art or a slightly different take of the rules. Like, what's the difference between BX and RI and Arsenin and Gygax? And why does one person consider this version better than this version? And why, why are there so many OSR retro clones? Because some person thinks that version's better than that version, so they recreated it, and some person recreated it, and blah, blah, blah. But which one is, in the argument of, is my D&D different than your D&D? Well, which D&D are you talking about? Because there's 21 different versions of D&D, and no two people play D&D exactly the same. Even the 5th edition people, each group are playing it differently. So how can somebody say you're playing it wrong? Which version am I playing? And, just because everybody's playing it different. We're all playing it different, and I don't know if anybody's doing it right. I mean, I've yet to see anybody actually play it right. If there is a right way, I don't know what it is. So, there we go. 21 versions of D&D. So if we're wondering in the argument of then versus now, OSR, retro clones, old school versus new school, when does the old school end and the new school start? Is there? It doesn't really, because there's, the BX, Expert, BCMI, Blue Home, there's just so blue box, red box, green box, black box, this box, I put them all in box. I don't like boxes. I find your box, just play the game. Whatever game you're playing at this point in time, if you're enjoying it, that's the best version for you. Oh. So there we go, a trip down memory lane, 21 versions of D&D to make the argument even more confusing. Hopefully that clarifies stuff, or doesn't. What version do I think is the best D&D version? I don't know, the one I enjoyed the most and played the most and have the best memories of? That's probably the best version for me, but it doesn't mean it's the best version. And this isn't even counting Pathfinder. Pathfinder It's tactically another version of D&D, just with a different name that went off in their own weird direction. So technically, that's 22 versions if we count Pathfinder. Oh, it hurts your head. Anyways, hopefully that helps. Comment down below if you appreciate this content. If you don't appreciate this content and you're planning on unsubscribing, let me know why. Help me hit 500 subs by August 4th and we'll do something crazy. Hit that thumbs up. Hit that notification button for the algorithm. And I will talk to you later. I have a headache.